Welcome to the Inspiration Contagion Podcast, where we spread inspiration one story at a time. I am your host, Holly Jean Jackson. Each episode spotlights and interviews one transformational leader, their stories, and their advice for how you too can lead yourself and others through inspiration. If you are a visionary seeking to uplevel your leadership skills, then this is the podcast for you. I invite you today to spread inspiration like a contagion. Welcome to the Inspiration Contagion movement. Welcome to episode 14 of Inspiration Contagion, the podcast and the movement. Today's episode is very special. We actually have somebody who is representing their grandmother and her truly inspirational story. So today on the podcast, I have Gian Panetta here on behalf of his grandmother, Tina Panetta. Welcome, Gian.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. So a quick background on Tina, his grandmother. Tina was born on November 13th of 1925 in the region of Abruzzi, Italy, in a small town called Ovindolai. I hope I pronounced that correctly. At the young age, at the young age of 21, she married Ettore. Is that correct? Ettore Panetta. Times were hard for them in Ovindolai. Both her father and her brother came to the United States to look for work. Her husband also needed to find some work, so he traveled to Venezuela, where the jobs were abundant. She left on her own for 5 years until Ettore returned. In the July of 1955, she and her husband decided to immigrate to the United States, specifically Washington, D.C. After being here for 1 week, Ettore was able to find a job as a busboy at the Statler Hilton, and she found a job at Scholl's Cafeteria as a kitchen helper. In January of 1968, she began to work as a waitress in the Senate dining room. Not being able to read and write English made it difficult at first. However, with time, she learned the English language, and she also learned the menu, which I imagine was important working in the dining room. So with that, Gian, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and your grandmother and why you're here to tell her story?
Yeah, so I can answer that in two parts, but first, before I talk about myself, I do want to tell, everyone listening, why do I want to tell my grandmother's story? And really, my grandmother, Tina Panetta, just like you mentioned, was an Italian-American immigrant who moved to the United States in 1955, and her hometown of Ovindoli, Italy, was ravaged by World War II. I remember interviewing her, and she told me that the Gestapo of the Nazi army broke into her home in Ovindoli, and they occupied the town, and they stole pretty much everything from us: money, clothes. Our home was gone, plates. And my father recalled when he was born in 1949, and really in the early 50s, him and my uncle would play with the broken plates that were broken by the Germans and use them as, toy planes and cars and everything like that. And she knew that if she stayed in Italy, her children their ability to dream would be lost to the reality of a struggle to survive in Ovindoli at the time. So she took the risk and she moved to the United States, where a lot of her family was. And it was really, really challenging. And in 1968, she did acquire a job, but it wasn't a stereotypical, there was no application for it. So what happened was my great uncle was actually the head chef in the United States Senate cafeteria for probably 10 years prior. And Senator John C. Stennis of Mississippi actually basically said to the chief architect at the time, hey, Tina's going to start, and there's really nothing you can do about it. And that's literally how my grandmother got the job. She was already loved by the Senate before she even started working there. But I think the consistency of her being there and the Senators seeing her really cemented that bond. And she really touched the lives of celebrities, senators, vice presidents, presidents, and their families. And a woman who, after 30 years since her retirement, she retired in 1990, is still remembered to this day as the mother on the hill. She is missed by everyone and often thought about in the private lives of these public figures. She really is a straightforward woman who never thinks she's better than anyone. She always gave people the benefit of the doubt, even when they knew they didn't deserve it. She was there for senators in their most painful days. I can recall a letter that Patricia Young, the wife of Senator Milton Young of I believe, North Dakota, wrote to her talking about how Milton is really having a hard time when his brother passed away. But she was also there for their happiest memories. And I remember the story she told me of when Vice President Bob Dole invited her to his wedding and actually asked her which one should, he was dating two women at the time. And she asked my grandmother, who should I marry? She chose Elizabeth. He ended up marrying Elizabeth. So that was pretty cool. And it's a great story. One of my favorite quotes that really best describes the effects, Tina had in the Senate is from 1973 by Senator George Aiken of Vermont. And in a letter he wrote to the ambassador of Italy, John A. Volpe, he stated, "Mrs. Panetta takes care of the senators here in the Senate dining room. I should say she spoils them." And I really think that just encapsulates exactly the effect she had during probably one of the most important transitions of our country. I mean, she was there from 1968 to 1990. So you can imagine what was going on during that time. And she was there, and she was that figure that people needed during a time of uncertainty and drastic change to move our country forward. And even though she had this undeniable motherly effect on these political leaders, the story is not necessarily about her or even the senators themselves. It's about what happens when a community comes together to help one family overcome the struggles of survival. And no one should be struggling for survival in this country. And these leaders made sure that Tina and her family did not have to struggle as she did in World War II. In fact, I sat down in December of 2019 with the 23rd Secretary of Defense, Gian Panetta, no relation, but he said something that really stuck with me, which was, "I have seen Washington at its best and Washington at its worst. What these senators did for Tina is Washington at its best." And I think what this story shows is during a really polarizing time in our country, when the United States Senate is at its best, guess who prospers? Your average, ordinary Americans who really just want to clock in, clock out, and make sure that the generation behind them are set up for success. And that's exactly what this story encapsulates. And this story really can only happen in America. And that's what really differentiates us from everyone else, are these types of stories, but also when the Senate is at its best, the nation prospers.
Yeah, I love that story. I love the idea of Mother on the Hill and the impact she had. And I also love the timing of this story. And like you just shared, when the Senate's at its best, middle America and ordinary Americans are at their best. And so it's great. Hopefully this beacon of light that she provided carries on so we can bring that back, given that we're in a very polarizing and challenging time again in history. But that's not the subject today. So what would you say made your grandmother so inspirational? What was her secret sauce as Mother on the Hill?
That's a really good question. And I actually had the pleasure of sitting down with a former senator who knew her personally. And I asked him that question. And what he told me was that she just knew how to play the game of politics in a way that not only connected the senators, whether you're Democrat and Republican, but also she knew how to, when when you enter the Senate dining room, there are no cameras, there's no media, the doors are shut, you're in private, and she knew how to take the weight of being a United States senator off their shoulders and really off the family's shoulders. And for that 45 minutes of breakfast with the family, they could just be themselves. And she brought that sense of safety and security, knowing that there was really that sense of warmth, that sense of when you go home for the first time after 20 years and you're with your mother, that's, smothering love. And that's exactly what she gave. And that's exactly, I think, what the senators absolutely loved about her, was that not only was she hardworking, loyal to her duties, went above and beyond to help senators, she went out of her way to make sure these senators and really their families were better off than they were before they met her.
Yeah, I love that. I imagine that also part of her secret sauce was giving them a sanctuary and a safe space where they could just breathe and not be under the continuous, constant pressure of performing with the media constantly on their back. So, and we all need that recovery space. Otherwise, we're just going to burn out ultimately, right? So I'm glad that she provided them that.
Yeah, and it's actually funny because her services were such in high demand because of the feeling that they gave her, that just what you talked about, that I remember she told me a story about Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont, who currently is a current senator. And she told me how her tables were full, and he basically demanded and basically had his own little protest of him and his guests to make sure Tina was the one that served her. And I actually have a clip of her telling that story and would love to share it with you.
Sure, go for it.
Awesome. Sorry, it's not.
While he's loading that clip, the image behind him is in that Senate hall in the dining room, and you can see the only female there at the table is his grandmother.
Yeah, that's Vice President Hubert Humphrey. I think at the time it was Senator Hubert Humphrey, but he was absolutely just in love with her. All right, so here is the clip. It's going, just to let everyone know, it's starting, ending a story, and about to kick into the Patrick Leahy story.
Fun, full energy, I talk with everybody, call a joke, talk a joke. Senator Hart invited me to go to Colorado ski. And all of the senators. Senator Leahy got one man, he's a libist, I don't know, some. All the time he come, he want to sit down at my table. So one day, I don't have my table. There was full of people. So they give somebody else. He said, no, we want a Tina. So I went to serve him a different table. And you know what? They give me $100. $100 gift. My table was full of the people. I don't have a table for him. So he said, on a different table. No, Senator Esky said that we want a Tina to serve us. So I went and served him and I take care. And then they gave me $100.
Senator Leahy gave you $100?
Uh-huh.
What'd you do with that $100?
I keep it. Say thank you. That's all.
So that's typically my grandmother. But yeah, so it's just an awesome story that really, again, encapsulates how much of a high demand she was in the Senate.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. So how would Tina define inspiration? I know you had some time to chat with her. How would she define inspiration?
So it's a really good question. And like I mentioned before, my grandmother when I asked her that question, she didn't really understand it. And just in terms of like, she doesn't think like that. And, but what she was really trying to say was, someone who obviously puts others in front of them, but really it's the safety and security of each other's families. So regardless of your political views or your thoughts on another person, at the end of the day, that's beef between you and me or party to party. What she views as inspirational is the ability of those senators to actually care about the families of the people whom they disagree with. And I feel like that was very relevant and very obvious to see back then. And today, I don't even know if they even do that. I don't even know if it's still possible, but that's what made the Senate special, was that respect of, we will take care of each other regardless of our political views.
Yeah. And I mean, as you know, you and I've had some political conversations, and both of us have political science backgrounds. And it's interesting today, nowadays, you can't really have safe political debate, even intellectual political debate, and still have a relationship. It's like a very small percentage of the population that can still do that, because things are so polarized. So I love that definition of being able to have differences of opinion, to have conflict, but still we're all human and we all need to support each other's families. And that's so relevant today. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how do you think that Tina would define success for herself, and how did she arrive at that definition?
Again, usually the best way to tell her values and to answer that question are probably stories. But what I can tell you is that success to her really means the safety and security of her own family. And it didn't matter about how hard she had to work. She constantly always told me that I had to provide a better life for my children, like regardless of what she did. And she told me a story about how for 20 years, while she worked in the United States Senate and my grandfather worked actually in the Senate printing department at that time, they had different shifts. He had the night shift and she had the day shift. So for 20 years, they literally did not see each other until they went to church on Sundays, and then the family dinner or family lunches. That was it. So, but they were willing to take that sacrifice because of what it would lead to. And they were correct. I mean, one thing that Senator Paul Simon says in the speech about her that he gave in 1990 on the Senate floor was that, Tina's story is the story of America, and that, my father went on to become a lawyer. The two sons graduated from college. And think about it, like what I said earlier on this call, my father and my uncle, when they were 5, 6, 7, were playing with broken plates that were broken by the Nazis. So you think about that and you think about the opportunity and what she did, that is the success. And that's all she cares about, even to this day.
Yeah, I love that. Sacrificing for your family and for their future is definitely something to live by. And especially given the challenges that they grew up in and lived through, I can see why that would be the polar north for her. So what are some of the challenges? We've already spoken about some of them. What are some of the challenges and obstacles that Tina faced along her journey to success?
Believe it or not, she did have to deal with a little bit of racism, because let's think about it. We just ended World War II, and Italy was not with the Allies. So I remember this conversation of, both her and my grandfather were trying to gain citizenship, and it was their 5th year into being a green card. And they're in Virginia, and they went up to this judge, and this judge has a thick Southern accent. And, he's basically about to give the stamp of approval, but he sees my grandfather's name, Ettore, and my grandmother's name her Italian name is named Cornata. So obviously that's Italian. And before he stamps it to basically make it official, he says, "Do you believe in fascism?" Which was huge at the time. And my grandfather said something on the lines of, "I can't control what my government does, but I'm here in America right now." And then he just smiled and gave the stamp of approval. But the fact that he had to ask that question simply because he was Italian just shows that racism and that view of Italians was still there at the time. And I do remember that the senators, when she was there, I always like to say her job was more secure than a Supreme Court justice, because if she was let go for any reason, you had 100 senators breathing down the neck of the chief architect. And anyone that would insult her, anyone that would disrespect her, you had 100 senators that had her back. So that was a huge challenge, and oftentimes she doesn't talk about it because, again, she puts other people in front of them. But that was a big challenge that she had to deal with, alongside not being able to read and write, and not being able to afford Christmas presents. And the Senate was there for them. And around Christmas time, as you just heard with Senator Leahy, they would give her larger tips, knowing her wage and knowing that she cannot afford the gifts. And they would do it for her because, I don't know, you have to ask them, because they loved her, really.
Yeah, I love that. It's a beautiful story of community coming together because they saw the light inside of your grandmother and the challenges and obstacles that she faced, and she didn't speak about them. She really just brought her best self to work every day to support the community versus complaining about the struggles that she was experiencing. But I'm so glad that they saw that and they were generous to support her so that she could give Christmas gifts at that time. It is sad to hear that those were some of the challenges, but that's why it's so important for us to all release assumptions and have open dialogue and conversations versus making judgments about others.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, John, what is one story of inspiration that Tina is most known for?
Oh, story of inspiration that she's most known for. So usually when people think of inspiration, I think they most likely think of inspirational acts, not that are serious, that lead to positive change. But for her, I think an inspirational story is the humor that she brought to the Senate, and how she just spoke to the senators just plainly, and the senators just ate it up. And I do have a specific story that really encapsulates how she spoke to senators, and it's actually of Senator Gary Hart, who was also a presidential nominee and an ambassador to Ireland. And I'd love to share that story with you guys as well.
Yeah, go for it. We'd love to hear it.
So I gotta get the clip.
I want to ask you something. I'll go with it.
So sorry about that, but she's just ending a story of Gary Hart and beginning the story that I want to share with you guys. So here we go.
I want to ask you something. I'll go with it. You start to left. I said, what are you left for? Because I see you. He make you happy because he see me all the time. And when you go to Italy, he said, you want to come to Rome? You make me the, when you take the people to show. I said, no, I don't want to come to Rome. I went so many times. You go. I said, but make sure you bring me something. When I come back, he sat down on the table all the way in the back. He called me and said, Tina, come on in here. I was in the bottom of the dining room. He was all the way up. I went over there and said, I got a gift for you. He gave me the little box. I said, hey, look nice. I opened up the box. There was nothing. I look, I remember now. I look at him. I said, Senator Hart, you went all the way down to Italy and bring me a MB box. To bring me a MB box. Tina, this is a leather box. This is a leather box. This is the only things I came for. But he said, you can put a little button or something inside. But no, this is just a leather box. And it crack up.
So that is just an example of how they just would let their guard down and just like she just would treat them like ordinary human beings, and you just get these awesome stories about it.
That's very cute. I love it. So, John, is there a what does heart-centered leadership mean to your grandmother? I got that one mixed up. So what does heart-centered leadership mean to Tina?
It's just not caring about the disagreements with each other. And again, always having each other's back, regardless of your opinions. And I think you're right. I think using the example of our polarization will help give people an understanding of that definition that she believes heart-centered leadership is that I just cannot explain how many times Republicans and Democrats would eat at her table because they both came because they want to be served by her. And they would both these senators would eat there and talk to each other as she served them. Like you just don't see that. And it really had to do with that motherly love that they could do absolutely nothing wrong, even though they know they did. And I think that's what made them just widely respect her.
Yeah, I love that. I think that one of the most powerful traits of amazing leaders, especially heart-centered leaders like Tina, is the power of being able to bring different biases and different opinions together to have a conversation, because we're better together in sharing the different ideas we have, because we're going to come up with an even stronger solution if we share our objections on both sides of the story. But these days, people won't even have those conversations. So we're left with problems and not solutions. So we need more of Mother on the Hill like Tina to bring us back together and get over ourselves so that we can find the solutions to all these problems.
And I think, I do want to show you one last clip because I think it really, really encapsulates that type of energy and love. And it's her describing not only a story, but also the personality of Vice President Joe Biden, who, as everyone knows, is running for president. They were very, very close. They still are. I actually have been trying to connect both of them, so hoping that I can do that. But I do want to play this clip because I think it really answers the question of the personality of Vice President Joe Biden, but to let everyone know, that type of personality she describes is literally everyone in the Senate at the time. So let me play that clip so everyone understands kind of what it was like back then and how that affected policy, really understanding each other and how they function. So here we go.
Let's see more.
Senator Hanson, he was my brother.
Joe Biden was your brother?
No, he was very nice. Very nice.
He might run for president.
Yeah?
Yeah. He's old, but he's running.
No, I don't think so. Let me see the story of the Senator Biden. If he died, is he dead?
He's alive. He's alive and well.
How old is he now?
He is 75. Look, November 20th. It's his birthday. Yours is November 13th.
Mamma mia.
We gotta figure out how to get a hold of him, huh? So tell me about a story about Joe Biden.
When he came the first time we saw him, he came with 2 boys. His wife, she just died with a plane accident. The wife and the little girl died on a plane. And the two boys, they was small. They was 7, 8 years old, the two boys. Then they come every once in a while with a diary. And Senator Biden was very nice to me, very nice all the time. And always respect, always ask about the children, always. It was nice. And we remain a friend all the time. Senator Biden, so you can talk to him like I talk to you. He married again and a school teacher. And she came in the dining room. It was a little girl, was a woman. Senator Biden.
Any other stories on Senator Biden?
No.
No? Will he remember you?
Oh my God, he remember? Sure he remember me.
Oh, maybe we can find him because he's still
And
up
then
and around.
the second son, Ari died, the second son.
Yeah,
He was sick or what? Accident?
passed away from cancer.
Oh, he was a too nice boy. They come with a black suit with a little tie. He was a cute little boy. He's all my people.
So, yeah, I think the fact that my grandmother remembers that clearly and remembers that at the hardest point in his life, two hardest points in his life, the passing of his mother and his first wife and her daughter, and yet he still kept that loving spirit. And again, this whole interview can be a whole 3 hours on these stories that I have that I would absolutely love to share, but you should hear the story on Vice President Bob Dole. She describes Bob Dole the exact same way as she describes Biden. And I think it's a side of the Senate that you don't see. And it's important because just like we've been talking about, because we don't see that side, if you're a Republican and I'm a Democrat, you're the enemy and I wish ill upon your family. That's where we are as a country. And until the current Senate provides something to the general public of, no, we actually care about the Democrats' family and I care about the Republicans' family, that's where our country is going to continue to be, is you're a Democrat, I hate you, and I wish ill upon your same family. Versus, yes, we have disagreements, but I'll always be there for your family, no matter what. That's the difference, and that's what we're missing, and that's what this story encapsulates, is that type of value system that we're missing.
Yeah, I love that. And I completely agree. I think we don't see the softer side. And it's interesting. I interviewed somebody recently, not a live podcast, but a pre-strategy call. And we were talking about this topic. And they were saying that it's so polarized and it's not ever going to improve unless people learn to come together. And the only way that's going to happen is by understanding politicians. And this person I was chatting with had this horrible notion that all politicians are just inherently evil. And I had to say something because I worked in public policy and with local politicians, and I also worked in DC for a while. And ultimately, if you really look behind the smokescreen of these leaders, they're deeply passionate. They're leading from their hearts. They're doing what they think is right. And the missing link is that, it is about humanity. Like, we are all human, and there should still be that connection alongside the debate. So I completely agree. So I wanted to ask you, at what age do you think Tina started believing in herself?
I don't know. And I don't know if she really ever started believing herself because she really believes in others. She told me how scared she was when, in around 1950, when they were still back in Italy, my grandfather left to go to Venezuela where the jobs were abundant. And she was there by age 21 for 5 years alone, no family, no one to help her, with 2 kids that she had to take care of. And I don't know if you would ask her, when did she start to believe in herself? I think she just does. She just acts. And I know when she describes the happiest moments of her life, it's from 1968 to 1990 with these senators. As she said, these are my people. And they 100% agree with that. Otherwise, they wouldn't be giving me a call when they find out that I'm Tina Panetta's grandson. They wouldn't be taking me out to lunch. I mean, think about United States Senator taking you out to lunch. It never happens, but they do that to me because it was my grandma. And the reason why I'm saying that is because she I guess, yeah, she just acts. And I guess if I had to give a date, it would probably be during the 1970s, when she really started to make an impact on the Senate, and the Senate really felt her presence. And she knew that if she would leave, which she did in 1990, which is exactly when the Senate changed its House schedule, where they would keep the families back in their home states and not in D.C., which is a huge problem of what contributes to this type of isolation, that there would be this hole. And in fact, there is. I mean, the chief of staff, Joe Radcliffe, wrote to her after she retired, saying that the Senate's not the same without you. Michelle Laxalt, who's the daughter of Paul Laxalt, who's the mother of Adam Laxalt, who was a former secretary, I believe, attorney of Nevada, said that, again, the Senate dynamic's not the same without you. Senator Leahy said the same thing. Grassley said the same thing. And I think it was during that time period where race tensions between the African-American community and the white community were very high. She was able to bridge that, which I think was very important in the internal life of senators.
Yeah. Well, perhaps instead, could you also maybe share a story around how Tina brought people together or expressed or led and showed that her belief in others, since you're saying she led from that place of believing in others? Is there a story that comes to mind around that?
A story about her leading from the front, about people believing in themselves.
Yeah, how she helped people believe in themselves.
Yeah, I would say probably the passing of Milton Young's brother. And why I say that is because during a very hard moment in this senator's life, she was able to bring to their entire family the ability to believe in better roads ahead by knowing that there's a community behind the senator and the wife and that family. I mean, a lot of the letters that you would see in the video that's in the show notes, a lot of those letters, if you pause it and look at it, are United States senators writing to the ambassadors of Italy, telling them to make sure that she is taken care of properly and that you will treat her right. And it describes, again, the Senate coming together, believing that the power of one senator's office, how much that can change someone's life. And I think that's really the eye-opener. I sat down with, I believe it was the deputy chief of staff of Senator Leahy, and I told him these stories and these letters, and he says, we don't do that anymore. I don't think they can do that anymore for ethics reasons. But I think it's really that, if we boil down to it. It's the realizing that the power of a United States Senator office has more impact on an individual life than any type of policy. And the amount of respect that Americans have for a United States Senator, and just a letter from a United States Senator, how many more doors that can open. And I think that really is what she installed in that mindset, because they would go out of their way to make sure that she was taken care of. And it wasn't any policy. It wasn't any, quid pro quo. It was just, here's a letter, you will do this in that respect. I think that's really it. Does that kind of help answer the question?
Yeah, that's great. So, John, I'm not sure that you have answers to all of our lightning round questions, but I'm going to ask you 2 of them on behalf of your grandmother. So what is one message that Tina would want to share with the world?
I think I'll probably have to defer to a quote that she says in Matthew 7:5, which is, I think it begins with like, you hypocrite, take the plank out of your own eye before you take the speck out of your brother's. And I think that is what, I think that's the answer to your question, where it's most likely you have to get rid of your biases before you can see clearly of the other person's side of the argument. That's what we're missing. And I think that's what she would want. That's what she would believe, and that's what she would want to answer for that question.
Yeah, I love that. Until you yourself are perfect, stop criticizing others and work on your own stuff to be that change in the world that we want to see ignite. I love that. And my other question from that section is, what's the legacy that you believe Tina wants to leave behind?
I think the legacy that she wants to leave behind is nothing really. But the legacy that she left behind is, I think, of what the senators gave her the name, the mother on the hill. The mother that no matter how bad you messed up, no matter your darkest days or your brightest moments, you got her in your corner. And she will show that by action and love. And I think that is the legacy that is left behind and will always be there in the Senate, and the Senate will always recognize it.
I haven't met your grandmother, but based on the stories that you just shared, I also think that what she's trying to leave behind is that it's family and community first over any differences that come between us.
You know what? I think you're absolutely right in that, and I think you hit it right on the head.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap up, but in wrapping up, there's a lot of stuff we're sharing in the show notes and in the links on the video for YouTube. And one of those is that a big part of why we put this whole episode together is John is trying to put a petition together. So John, why don't you tell us a little bit about that petition and how the audience can help?
Yeah, so this petition came around actually because when I got lunch with Senator Dave Durenberger, and he told me that I should start a petition because my goal is to get a portrait of her hung up in the United States Senate dining room. And the reason for that is for really 2 things. It's to recognize those who go unrecognized in the Senate, the committee staff, the Capitol Police, the staffers, the interns, the pages, all of that, which the senators 100% would agree, the Senate would not run without them. But also it's to remind the current Senate and the future senators of who prospers when the Senate at its best. And that's what I want to resonate. So the petition is for those reasons. And I provide a link to a video. I've also provided a link to a shorter video that you can share, but that's exactly what I want to do with the petition. And what's really cool is Senator Leahy is on that the Rules Committee, which determines what portraits and pictures go up in the Senate dining room. I have 2 or 3 letters from him, as well as that story, as you all heard, as well as Dick Durbin wrote to her, who was the mentee of Senator Paul Simon, who gave a speech about her on the Senate floor. And I have letters from senators' predecessors and their predecessors' predecessors about my grandmother. And that's what this petition is going to do. And I'm going to send copies of those letters to those senators of their predecessors, talking about how vital she is to the Senate.
Great. So for everyone listening, I highly recommend you check out those videos. They are amazing and really, really inspiring and give you even more information and images on Tina, the mother on the hill, as well as check out the link to that petition. And I'm sure it will advise you on how you can help. I imagine it includes signing the petition. Is that correct? Online?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Additionally, I'll have a link to this live episode. We've recorded this on video as well. So if you prefer watching the episode, you can do that. That will be in the show notes as well. Thank you so much, John, for joining us for this episode. Any last words?
Wishing everyone well, and to don't judge others and have good conversations with people.
That's great advice. Don't judge others. All right. Well, that wraps up this episode of Inspiration Contagion. I look forward to seeing you in our next episode. Thank you. Thank you for joining the show today. I hope you were inspired. More importantly, I hope you take action. What is one thing you can do in this moment that will inspire someone? Without action, nothing changes. Be the change you wish to see in the world. If this show truly inspired you, we ask that you share it through your network. Help us spread the light and inspiration in the world. I look forward to seeing you here next week.